Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we have a massive, crazy story from Reddit about an entitled golden child sister and parents who took favoritism to an extreme level. Seriously, wait until you hear how this $26 million secret drops at a Thanksgiving dinner. Without wasting any more time, let's get right into it. My parents always favored my sister, but when she discovered my $26 million secret, she completely lost it at Thanksgiving dinner. My dad couldn't even get a word out. I was 13 years old when I finally truly realized that my parents kept two entirely distinct, wildly contradictory versions of our family history. There was the official, heavily curated version where I barely existed, serving only as a blurry background extra in the grand cinematic masterpiece of their lives. And then there was the harsh, unspoken reality where I simply didn't matter at all. My sister, Chloe, was 5 years older than me, and from the moment she could speak, she made absolutely sure everyone within a 10-mile radius knew she was the main attraction of the universe. She wasn't just smart. She was weaponized perfection. Chloe was a classical concert pianist by the time she was 10 years old, capable of playing Chopin with a terrifying mechanical precision. By high school, she was the ruthless captain of the debate team, the golden child who pulled straight A's like it was coded directly into her DNA by some divine creator. And here is the brutal, inescapable truth that made it all so much worse. The reality I had to swallow every single morning. She actually had talent. Real, undeniable talent. Her architectural sketches in her junior year of high school showed a visionary grasp of space and light. It was the kind of spatial reasoning that would later make Ivy League professors practically weep and call her a generational talent to my parents' faces. Our parents worshipped at her altar daily. We lived in an upscale, highly exclusive suburb of Denver in the late 2000s. The house looked absolutely perfect from the impeccably manicured street. It was a massive, imposing two-story colonial with a pristine, emerald green lawn that was cut twice a week. It represented the ultimate, glossy American dream package. But the moment you stepped through the heavy oak front door, it was a completely different movie. Chloe's bedroom wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a heavily guarded trophy museum. Heavy gold medals, towering brass trophies, and ornately framed certificates of extreme excellence were plastered on every single inch of available wall space. My mom actually went in there twice a week, armed with microfiber cloths and expensive polish, to dust them like she was maintaining a sacred, holy shrine. My room, on the other hand, was tucked away at the freezing end of the hallway, directly above the drafty garage. They treated my doorway like a permanent blind spot. They would literally walk past it without glancing in, as if I was some unsavory drifter they were forced to rent space to for tax purposes. Inside, I had a collection of beat-up, second-hand sports equipment I had painstakingly bought with my own lawn-mowing money, and a clunky, mismatched computer I had assembled from scavenged spare parts thrown out by the local library. The financial scoreboard of our childhood told the real, unfiltered story better than any psychological evaluation ever could. Chloe got brand new, high-end designer clothes every single season. She spent entire, glorious Saturdays on luxurious shopping sprees with our mom at the most expensive boutiques downtown, coming back with bags that cost more than a used car. I got the embarrassing hand-me-downs from our neighbor's son, a kid named Kevin who was remarkably 3 inches shorter and 20 pounds lighter than me. I spent my early teenage years walking around the neighborhood with my ankles exposed to the Colorado cold, the seams of my shirts straining against my shoulders, looking like a neglected, impoverished afterthought. Meanwhile, my sister paraded around the house looking like she had just stepped off a Vogue magazine cover. The contrast wasn't just noticeable to anyone who visited. It was intentionally, maliciously engineered by my parents to elevate her divine status by actively diminishing mine. They needed a peasant in the castle to make the princess look taller. The sheer, breathtaking depth of their apathy really hit home during the sweltering spring of my sophomore year in high school. Against all conceivable odds, my high school baseball team had scrapped and clawed our way into the state semifinals. It was, without a doubt, the single biggest moment of my life up to that point. I was the starting pitcher. For weeks, I had talked about nothing else. At breakfast, I would mention the opposing team's batting averages. Dad would simply nod, his eyes glued to the Wall Street Journal. while Mom meticulously arranged sliced fruit for Chloe's specialized diet. On the morning of the big game, Dad promised he would try to swing by if his high-stakes corporate sales meeting ended early. Mom vaguely muttered something about joining him if she finished picking up Chloe's dry cleaning. We played our hearts out under the blistering sun. The game was a brutal, grueling grind, eventually going into extra innings. I pitched 7 incredibly strong innings, my arm feeling like it was going to completely detach from my shoulder, but the adrenaline kept me firing fastballs. In the bottom of the 9th, with 2 outs and a man on second, I stepped up to the plate and miraculously drove a line drive right up the middle, knocking in the winning run. The crowd erupted. My teammates mobbed me, burying me in a pile of dust and sweat. When the celebration finally died down, I stood on the dusty field, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and eagerly scanned the aluminum bleachers. I looked past the screaming parents, the homemade painted signs, the proud fathers slapping their exhausted sons on the back. I searched every single row, my desperate eyes scanning for a familiar face, a recognizable jacket. Nothing. The seats where they should have been were completely, devastatingly empty. Just my coach, Mr. Nelson, and his wife offering me a sympathetic, pitying smile that hurt worse than a physical punch. I walked into the locker room, the metallic taste of adrenaline turning into ash in my mouth. I used the grimy payphone outside the gymnasium to call home, dropping my last quarter into the slot. Chloe answered the phone on the 4th ring with her usual, infuriatingly bored drawl. "Hello. Hey, it's me," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "We won." I pitched 7 innings and hit the game winner. I heard the sound of her aggressively typing on her laptop in the background. "Dad's meeting ran late," she muttered, not pausing her typing. "Mom went with him to some dinner thing. Congrats, I guess." She didn't even ask the final score. She didn't ask how I felt. She just hung up. I stood there in the echoing hallway, listening to the monotonous dial tone for a full 2 minutes, letting the absolute reality of my worthlessness wash over me. Wow, that breaks my heart for OP. Look, from an objective standpoint, it's perfectly fine to support a genuinely talented kid like Chloe, but entirely abandoning your other child's biggest life moments is just terrible parenting. You can foster a prodigy without neglecting your other kid. That kind of emotional damage stays with a person forever. Birthdays were the clearest, most undeniable indicator of the rigid hierarchy in our household. When Chloe turned 16, it was treated like a national holiday. She got a massively themed winter wonderland party at a rented country club. There was professional catering featuring a sushi bar, expensive imported floral decorations, 30 snobby kids from her private prep school, and 6 solid weeks of stressful, agonizing planning by my mother, who treated the event like she was coordinating a royal wedding. When I turned 16, I got a stale, heavily discounted grocery store sheet cake that tasted like sweet cardboard, and a quiet, awkward dinner at the kitchen island. No friends invited. No presents wrapped in shiny paper. Just a $20 bill slid across the counter by my dad. One year, when I turned 14, they actually forgot my birthday completely. For 3 entire days. I didn't remind them. I just waited to see how long it would take. When Mom finally realized it on a Tuesday evening, she offered a dismissive laugh, handed me a leftover muffin from breakfast, and said, "Oh, honey, we've just been so overwhelmed with Chloe's piano recital. Happy belated." The pattern was identical for absolutely everything that mattered in a developing child's life. School open houses, athletic achievements, science fairs, basic acknowledgement of existence. Chloe got the glaring, blinding spotlight. I got the pathetic, moldy scraps falling from the table. By the time I was 17, I was completely, thoroughly done auditioning for an audience that would never, ever clap. They wanted to pretend I was invisible. They needed me to be a failure to highlight her success. Fine. I would embrace the shadows. Sitting in my freezing room, I made a quiet, burning vow to myself. I would build something so massive, so undeniably, financially colossal, that they couldn't ignore it even if they tried. But the crucial, defining difference was that I wasn't going to tell them a single word about it until it was far too late for them to take any credit. College was supposed to be my grand escape. Instead, it served as another brutal reminder that Chloe's golden shadow stretched everywhere. The harsh reality of my situation culminated on a gloomy Tuesday evening during my senior year of high school. I sat at our expansive granite kitchen table, nervously reviewing the thin stack of college financial aid packets. My mom sat across from me, casually sipping an expensive, imported espresso, completely absorbed in a catalog for high-end patio furniture. Finally, she sighed, annoyed that she had to address me, and pushed a single piece of paper across the cold stone. She didn't even bother to look me in the eye. "We've run the numbers," she said, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Almost the entirety of the family's college savings fund has been allocated to Chloe's education. Her Ivy League architecture program is incredibly demanding and expensive, and as you know, she's applying to prestigious grad schools right after. We have to prioritize the investment with the highest guaranteed return." I stared at the paperwork, my stomach dropping through the floorboards. "How much is left?" I asked, my voice barely above a raspy whisper. My mom rolled her eyes, clearly irritated by the mundane question. "About $7,500. You'll need to figure out the rest with loans or a job. We simply can't compromise Chloe's trajectory." I did the devastating math in my head, feeling a cold, paralyzing wave of realization wash over me. Chloe's elite education, including her housing and stipends for study abroad trips to Paris, was going to cost them close to $450,000 over her 7 years of schooling. I got $7,500. It wasn't just a financial disparity. It was a screaming, numerical declaration of my absolute worthlessness in their eyes. "Hold up, let me pause here for a second. $450,000 for one kid and $7,500 for the other? Prioritizing investments with high returns makes sense in the corporate world. But this is a family, not a hedge fund." By tying their financial support purely to prestigious potential, OP's parents aren't just playing favorites. They are treating their children like stock options. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or flip the table. I just calmly took the paper, folded it, and walked out of the room. Arizona State University had already offered me a partial academic scholarship based on my consistently high grades. Grades my parents had never once asked to see. I eagerly accepted it the very next morning. I moved out to Tempe the very second I legally could. To survive and pay for the rest of my tuition and basic food, I took a brutal job working 28 hours a week at the campus tech support center. While my peers were out partying or joining fraternities, I spent my nights fixing broken laptops, recovering lost sociology essays, and wiping nasty malware off computers for wealthy students who couldn't figure out how to restart a router. My dorm room smelled permanently of old, cheap pizza, burnt coffee, and deep, lingering regret. The cinderblock walls were thin enough to hear my terrible roommate's entire, chaotic League of Legends sessions screaming into his headset at 3 in the morning. But I didn't care. It was mine. It was a fortress away from my family's toxic perfection. Freshman year, fate finally threw me a massive lifeline. I met Professor Harrison during a chaotic orientation week. He was an older, incredibly sharp-eyed guy who had worked as a senior engineer at Oracle before pivoting to teaching to escape the corporate grind. One evening, he walked into the library commons and caught me quietly, methodically rebuilding a panicked senior's fried laptop motherboard using nothing but a cheap soldering iron and sheer intuition. He stood completely silently over my shoulder for 10 excruciating minutes before speaking. "You actually understand the underlying system's architecture," he said, his voice laced with genuine shock. "Most kids your age just know how to swipe on consumer apps and call themselves tech-savvy. You're actually reading the hardware." He didn't just walk away and give me a pat on the back. He actively recruited me. He offered me a highly coveted, invite-only spot in his advanced development seminar, a grueling class usually strictly reserved for top-tier seniors and grad students. There were only 8 students in the windowless room, and the curriculum bypassed textbook theory entirely, focusing heavily on real-world application, secure coding, and building actual marketable, scalable products. That single, rigorous class completely changed my entire life's trajectory. It gave me the professional framework, the brutal critiques, and the high-level logic to turn my raw, untrained talent into a structured, unstoppable ambition. I stopped playing video games. I stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. I was building an arsenal. By the brutal winter of my sophomore year, while operating entirely on black coffee and adrenaline, I had quietly built a rudimentary but highly effective inventory management software system specifically tailored for small, independent construction contractors. It was nothing visually fancy, no sleek UI or animated graphics, just clean, impenetrable, hyper-efficient code that let them track raw materials, heavy machinery locations, and complex job costs without relying on the bloated, nightmare enterprise platforms that charged them a predatory $500 a month. I aggressively pitched it locally. I charged a flat, irresistible $99 for the initial system setup, and a mere $29 monthly fee for ongoing maintenance and server hosting. I hustled like a madman between classes and got 16 solid clients before winter break even started. It was generating about $48,000 a year in recurring, highly scalable revenue. It was real, tangible money, not Silicon Valley yacht money, but it was undeniable mathematical proof that my core concept worked perfectly. My parents called me maybe 3 times that entire grueling semester. The conversations were never about my intense classes, my health, or whether I was eating enough. They were exclusively, obsessively about Chloe. She had just gotten engaged to Preston, some insufferable, arrogant finance bro from Connecticut who reeked of old money, trust funds, and unearned confidence. The chaotic, multimillion-dollar wedding planning completely consumed every single conversation we had. "Did you hear the fabulous news about Chloe's ring?" My mom gushed through the phone one Tuesday night, ignoring the fact that I sounded exhausted. For flawless carats, custom cut in Antwerp, Preston's family has a massive, historic compound in the Hamptons. They're talking about flying in a celebrity chef. "That's great, Mom," I replied, rubbing my burning eyes, exhausted from staring at glowing lines of C++ code all night. "Listen, Mom, are you even listening to me? I officially launched my software company today. I have paying clients." There was a brief, highly irritated pause on the line. "Yeah, for carats. Very impressive." She sighed heavily, making it abundantly clear I was rudely interrupting the only topic that mattered in her universe. "Make sure you rent a decent tuxedo for the rehearsal dinner. Don't embarrass us." She hung up. Senior year arrived, and decision time hit me like a runaway freight train. My specialized coding skills had drawn major corporate attention at university job fairs. Microsoft aggressively wanted me in their Seattle headquarters with a lucrative starting salary of $95,000 plus a signing bonus. Amazon had a highly competitive, cutthroat spot waiting in their AWS security division for an astonishing $105,000. Both elite offers came with vested equity, premium health benefits, 401k matching, and the whole comfortable, guaranteed corporate package. Or I could take my scrappy construction software, completely tear it down to the studs, rebuild it focusing strictly on high-level supply chain security, and go all in completely solo. I named the new venture TrackCore. I made the colossal, naive mistake of mentioning my agonizing dilemma during a brief, incredibly tense Christmas visit home. "You're seriously considering turning down Microsoft?" My dad stared at me across the opulent living room like I had just announced I was joining a fringe doomsday cult in the desert. "That is guaranteed 6 figures in a few years, complete stability. Starting a software business from scratch with no backing is financial suicide. It's reckless and stupid." Chloe, lounging luxuriously on the imported leather couch, surrounded by expensive, imported wedding fabric samples and premium boutique flower catalogs, didn't even bother to look up from her iPad. "Over 70% of tech startups fail within the first 2 years, she added smugly, swirling a glass of expensive wine. "You'd be throwing away your entire pathetic, mediocre future to play CEO. Leave the business building to people who actually know how the world works, like Preston." Mom patronizingly reached over and patted my hand with a cold smile. "Not everyone has elite entrepreneurial instincts, honey. There's absolutely no shame in taking a stable, boring corporate job in a cubicle. It fits your personality much better." The unspoken, poisonous part echoed loudly in the cavernous room. Not everyone can be an exceptional, generational genius like Chloe. That was fine. I didn't argue. I had stopped needing their validation around the exact time I realized their souls were physically incapable of offering it. I packed my bags that night, skipping Christmas morning entirely, and flew back to Arizona. For months after graduation, while my entire extended family obsessed over the agonizing details of Chloe's extravagant $150,000 country club wedding, an event I deliberately skipped, claiming I had food poisoning, I packed my entire life into a beat-up, high-mileage Toyota sedan and officially moved my operations to Phoenix. I had about $16,500 in hard-earned savings and an incredibly complex, barely working beta prototype of TrackCore. I rented a tiny, miserable, roach-infested studio apartment in a highly sketchy, industrial part of Tempe. The crumbling brick building constantly smelled like cheap marijuana, stale beer, and despair. The ancient window AC unit sounded like a lawnmower violently dying every night at 3 a.m. But the rent was dirt cheap, it was mine, and I was building something they could never, ever begin to understand. The first 18 months of running TrackCore nearly broke me mentally, physically, and spiritually. The core pitch was simple but vital. Real-time, tamper-proof tracking and security for highly expensive construction materials and heavy equipment. Small to mid-sized contractors were bleeding mid-six figures a year to highly organized theft rings and devastating inside fraud. Insurance companies were merciless, jacking up premiums and barely covering the deductibles. I wanted to build an airtight, invisible digital fence that prevented the catastrophic loss before the thief even left the lot. The underlying technology was incredibly solid, relying on encrypted mesh networks, but selling it to stubborn, old-school contractors who barely trusted email was pure, unadulterated hell. I spent 6 agonizing months cold calling, racking up hundreds of brutal, humiliating rejections. I couldn't get references without clients, and I couldn't get clients without references. Slowly, painfully, I managed to assemble a core team of brilliant, hungry misfits who blindly believed in the vision. There was Sarah, a fiercely intelligent front-end developer who quit her agency job, David, a ruthless, penny-pinching operations guy, and Marcus, a grizzled, seasoned supply chain expert who knew every trick in the logistics book. Then, the catastrophic company-ending incident happened with one of our very early, highly trusted beta clients. The guy ran 3 large commercial construction crews and had solid industry references. We enthusiastically installed our highly expensive tracking hardware across his entire massive operation. But throughout the blazing Arizona summer, things felt increasingly, sickeningly wrong. High-value equipment, laser levels, copper wiring, small excavators, kept mysteriously vanishing into thin air right before our sensors logged any unauthorized movement. Turned out, the contractor himself was the mastermind. He was brilliantly, maliciously using our own proprietary data against us. He had meticulously studied the tracking patterns on the dashboard and identified a tiny, unavoidable 50-second blind spot during our mandatory, over-the-air firmware system update refresh rates. In a highly concentrated, devastating 6-week period, he coordinated massive thefts during those exact, precise intervals, stealing over $250,000 worth of heavy equipment, fencing it in Mexico before the system even registered the loss. He got arrested eventually, thanks to a sloppy cash deposit, but not before 3 other massive, furious contractors who used our platform sued TrackCore into utter oblivion. They viciously, publicly claimed our tracking system was fundamentally flawed and actively enabled the theft by showing the criminal exactly when the digital guards were down. They wanted massive punitive damages. They wanted us completely shut down and barred from the industry. The mounting legal fees instantly drained our fragile, meager capital. I had to let our tiny office space go. I spent 4 agonizing, soul-crushing months sleeping on a deflated air mattress in a dusty, uninsulated garage loaned to us by Sarah's uncle. I showered at a cheap, grimy 24-hour gym and lived exclusively on expired protein bars and bitter gas station coffee. My team maxed out their personal credit cards just to keep the Amazon Web Services servers running, so our remaining clients wouldn't experience downtime. We were exactly 1 bad week, 1 missed server payment, away from shutting the doors forever and declaring total bankruptcy. During this absolute, terrifying nightmare, My parents called exactly once. "Chloe's pregnant," my mom announced, her voice vibrating with sheer, manic joy, completely ignoring the fact that my voice was hoarse from stress. "We're going to be grandparents. It's a boy. We're actually helping them out right now with a massive $100,000 down payment for a stunning new 6-bedroom house in Connecticut. Chloe simply deserves something nice and spacious with the new baby coming." I was sleeping on concrete in a freezing garage, fighting a multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit that could destroy my entire life and put me in debt forever. But sure, my sister, married to a wealthy finance executive, desperately needed their retirement money to upgrade her mansion. Just when I thought the agonizing pressure couldn't possibly get any worse, just when I thought I had hit the absolute rock bottom of human endurance, Chloe delivered a blow so malicious, so utterly, breathtakingly devastating, that it fundamentally altered how I viewed my own blood forever. TrackCore was aggressively hemorrhaging cash fighting the frivolous lawsuit. Every dollar we made went directly to our defense attorney. To survive and cut every single cent of overhead, I had to temporarily move our primary backup servers out of the garage and into my incredibly sketchy, newly rented, 400-square-foot residential apartment. It was a massive, dangerous fire hazard. The server racks were incredibly noisy, generating a ridiculous amount of heat that made the apartment feel like a sauna, and they drew a suspicious amount of electricity, but it was the only way to keep the business alive without paying commercial data center fees. Around Thanksgiving of that darkest year, Chloe and her snobby husband Preston happened to be flying through Phoenix on their way to some outrageously expensive luxury wellness resort in Sedona. My mother, in a rare fit of performative maternal concern, essentially forced Chloe to drop by and check on her struggling little brother. I was dangerously exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep in 4 days, stressed out of my mind, and terrified of the pending litigation. But against my better judgment, I buzzed her in. Chloe walked into my sweltering, chaotic apartment holding her $4,000 designer purse tightly close to her chest. Her nose wrinkled in absolute disgust, like she was afraid the stench of poverty might physically infect her. She didn't hug me. She didn't say hello. She took one long, incredibly judgmental look at the towering, blinking server racks humming loudly in the middle of my tiny living room, the dangerous tangle of thick industrial cables snaking across the cheap, stained carpet, and my bare mattress shoved into a cramped corner next to the bathroom. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask if I was eating, if I needed a hot meal, or a temporary loan just to survive the month. She just sneered, a look of pure, unadulterated contempt washing over her perfectly contoured face. "This is incredibly embarrassing," she said, her voice dripping with aristocratic disgust, echoing over the roar of the cooling fans. "Preston is waiting in the black car downstairs. I can't even let him come up here and see how you live. You're bringing absolute shame to the family name living in this squalor. It smells like desperation." I was too utterly drained to fight back. "Just leave, Chloe," I muttered, turning my back to her to check a terminal screen. "Enjoy your spa trip." She scoffed, turned on her designer heels and walked out. I thought that was the end of it. I went back to frantically coding, desperately trying to patch the critical vulnerability that had caused the massive lawsuit in the first place. 2 days later, at exactly 8 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday morning, there was a violent, authoritative pounding on my apartment door. It wasn't my team bringing coffee. It was the furious building manager, accompanied by a stern-looking city code enforcement officer holding a clipboard. Someone had made a highly detailed, extremely specific, anonymous tip to the city planning department. The tip formally reported an illegal, large-scale commercial server operation running in a strictly zoned residential building. The caller specifically detailed the presence of massive server racks, excessive, dangerous power consumption creating a severe fire hazard, and blatant noncompliance with municipal commercial zoning laws. I was handed a 72-hour emergency eviction notice, backed by a threat of a $10,000 fine if I didn't comply immediately. I was completely, utterly blindsided. The building manager screamed at me in the hallway, threatening to call the police to seize the equipment if it wasn't out by Friday. I had absolute zero cash to rent an emergency commercial space. Panic set in like a physical poison. Sarah, David, Marcus, and I frantically pooled our last few dollars, rented a dilapidated U-Haul truck, and spent 48 straight hours moving millions of lines of proprietary code and incredibly fragile, expensive hardware into an unheated, terrifyingly insecure public storage unit out in the desert just to keep the servers from being legally seized by the city. With the apartment gone, my lease terminated, and my security deposit completely forfeit to cover damages, I had absolutely nowhere left to go. For the next 4 agonizing weeks, in the dead of the freezing desert winter, I slept in the front seat of my 10-year-old Toyota Corolla. I parked under dim, flickering streetlights in the far corners of massive Walmart parking lots. I shivered violently under a single cheap, thin fleece blanket, forcing myself to wake up every 3 hours to start the engine just to run the heater for 10 minutes before the gas gauge dipped too low. My back was permanently destroyed from sleeping across the parking brake. My spirit was utterly, completely crushed. Every night, staring at the frosted windshield, I felt the icy grip of total failure. I knew exactly who had made the call. No one else in the entire world knew exactly what was inside that apartment. I used the very last bit of battery percentage on my cracked phone to call Chloe. She answered happily from the 5-star spa in Sedona, classical music playing softly in the background. "Why?" I rasped, my breath fogging up the freezing windows of my car, my teeth chattering. "Why would you call the city code enforcement on me? I'm literally sleeping in my car, Chloe. I have nothing." There was absolutely no hesitation, no gasp of shock, no shred of guilt in her voice. Just cold, clinical, breathtaking arrogance. "I'm just helping you wake up from this delusion, little brother," she said smoothly, as if she were discussing the weather. "You're embarrassing the family with this pathetic tech fantasy. It's a dangerous fire hazard anyway. I did the landlord a favor. You should honestly be thanking me for forcing you to face reality. Come home, beg Dad for help, get a real, normal job, and stop pretending you're some hotshot entrepreneur. It's pathetic, and it's making Preston uncomfortable." She hung up, leaving me with the dead silence of the dial tone. Sitting in that freezing car, staring out at the desolate, icy parking lot, something inside me permanently, irrevocably snapped. The last remaining, fragile, desperate thread of familial loyalty I had completely disintegrated into dust. She hadn't just ignored me. She had actively, maliciously, deliberately tried to destroy my life, to render me homeless, simply because my struggle was aesthetically unpleasing to her wealthy husband. Okay guys, I have to ask you a question right here. If your own sibling actively sabotaged your business and got you evicted just because your apartment didn't fit their aesthetic, what would you do? Option A. Go completely no contact right then and there. Or Option B. Play the long game, pretend you failed, and plot a massive revenge. Let me know in the comments because OP is handling this way calmer than I would. From that exact, freezing second, Chloe wasn't my sister anymore. She was just an enemy. She was a disease I needed to purge from my life. And my parents, who had undoubtedly nodded along with her twisted, tough love narrative and funded her superiority complex, were completely dead to me. I gripped the freezing steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white and my joints ached. They wanted me to be a failure. They desperately needed me to be a failure to justify their toxic obsession with her perfection. I swore to God, right there in the freezing dark, alone in a Walmart parking lot, that I would not only survive this hell, but I would climb so incredibly high they would have to crane their necks just to see the bottom of my shoes. And when the day finally came that my empire was fully built and bulletproof, I would return. I would burn their entitled, arrogant, fake world straight to the ground, and I wouldn't lose a single second of sleep watching the ashes fall. The absolute darkest moments of my life, freezing in that cramped Corolla and staring out at the desolate Walmart parking lot, eventually became the very foundation of my empire. The universe has a strange way of balancing the scales, and my vindication started in a sterile, fluorescent-lit deposition room. The catastrophic lawsuit that was supposed to completely obliterate TrackCore and bankrupt me for the rest of my natural life ended up being our ultimate salvation. During the grueling discovery phase of the litigation, the opposing legal counsel, a sharp, high-priced corporate attorney representing the furious contractors, demanded a full, unredacted audit of our proprietary source code. We handed it over, fully expecting them to find the nails for our coffin. Instead, a week later, she called me directly. Her tone had shifted from aggressive hostility to a quiet, grudging professional respect. "Your tracking software didn't enable this massive theft," she stated flatly over the phone. "The corrupt contractor used your dashboard to identify the sensor vulnerabilities, yes. But he didn't realize that the underlying hidden architecture of your system, that secondary mesh network you built, actually created an invisible parallel data trail during those 50-second update gaps. Your system didn't fail. It worked perfectly. It logged every single unauthorized movement he made, completely bypassing his attempts to scrub the primary servers." She officially testified in court that our system was actually exponentially more secure than the current multi-million-dollar industry standard. The airtight case we subsequently built using our own hidden logs provided the exact, irrefutable forensic evidence that got the corrupt contractor convicted of federal grand larceny. We didn't just win the lawsuit, we utterly humiliated the opposition and completely revolutionized the industry standard for supply chain security in one swift motion. Word spread through the tight-knit commercial construction circles like a raging California wildfire. The software that caught the uncatchable thief became the hottest commodity in the logistics world. Within 10 chaotic, sleep-deprived months, we had 85 major commercial contractors signed to massive multi-year enterprise contracts. Our annual recurring revenue violently smashed through the 7-figure ceiling and just kept climbing. We officially moved out of the storage unit and into a massive, sleek corporate office complex in Scottsdale. I hired employee number 20, then number 50. By the end of year 3, we had a dedicated staff of over 120 brilliant people. Then came year 5. TrackCore was deeply embedded in national infrastructure projects totaling roughly $150 million a year. We were universally recognized as the undisputed gold standard in digital logistics security. That's when Industriate Tech finally came aggressively knocking on my door. They were a massive, global industrial supply chain conglomerate, the kind of invisible, terrifyingly powerful company that never advertises on television because every major corporation on Earth already desperately relies on them. They didn't just want TrackCore's impressive client base. They desperately needed our proprietary core technology to integrate across their entire, sprawling North American operations. They were currently facing 5 major class-action lawsuits over catastrophic supply chain theft, and our specific tech was the only thing that could legally shield them moving forward. We spent 12 exhausting, caffeine-fueled weeks locked in a high-rise conference room negotiating the acquisition. The final, signed deal was staggering. A total buyout of $26.5 million in cold, hard cash, plus massive retention bonuses for all my current employees, and highly lucrative equity options in Industriate Tech's new security division. I made absolutely sure that everyone who had loyally stood by me in that freezing garage walked away with life-changing money. Sarah, David, and Marcus each received high 7-figure payouts. They cried in my office when I handed them the term sheets. The day the ink dried and the massive deal officially closed, I stared at my private banking app in utter disbelief. I was 28 years old, and my personal liquid net worth sat at a staggering $18 million after all federal taxes and corporate distributions. That night, sitting alone in my modest, sparsely furnished 2-bedroom condo in Scottsdale, I poured a glass of cheap bourbon and stared at the glowing numbers on my phone. I thought about calling my parents. I thought about calling Chloe. I thought about the sheer, undeniable satisfaction of rubbing those 8 zeros aggressively in their faces. But I didn't. I remembered the bone-chilling cold of my car. I remembered Chloe's cruel, mocking voice telling me I was an embarrassment. The absolute truth was, they had already rigidly decided exactly who I was in their twisted family narrative. I was the failure. I was the dark background to Chloe's blinding light. Hard, undeniable facts wouldn't magically change a fictional story they had been passionately telling themselves for 3 decades. So, I chose total silence. I quietly invested the vast majority of the money in diversified index funds and municipal bonds. I anonymously set up a massive $2 million scholarship fund for overlooked, underprivileged high school kids interested in software engineering. And then, I simply disappeared. I traveled to Tokyo, spent a month hiking in Patagonia, drank wine in Barcelona, and finally saw the massive, beautiful world I had been far too busy surviving to explore. I gave my family incredibly vague, non-committal updates whenever they bothered to call, which was rare. I let them keep believing I was a struggling IT guy resetting passwords for a living. I was a ghost with a loaded bank account. I genuinely respect this decision. Most people, the second they get that kind of money, would run back to flaunt it in their haters' faces. But OP realizing that hard facts wouldn't magically change their toxic narrative shows an incredible level of maturity. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't a loud confrontation. It's just living a great life in complete silence. Over the next 2 years, I lived an incredibly peaceful, highly guarded double life. While my investment portfolio quietly generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in passive income every single month, my family's financial reality was secretly, rapidly crumbling under the crushing, unbearable weight of their own manufactured illusions. My parents still called every few months, but the agonizing conversations were identical scripts. They never, ever asked about my life. The calls were entirely dedicated to chronicling Chloe's endless, insatiable appetite for luxury. She had browbeaten her husband, Preston, into buying a multi-million-dollar summer estate in Martha's Vineyard. They constantly bragged about the private Montessori school their twin children attended, which cost more than most people's college tuition. But beneath the glossy, carefully curated surface, I could hear the terrifying strain in my mother's voice. She casually mentioned that they had completely drained their 401k to help Chloe with a minor cash flow issue regarding her failing boutique architectural firm. They had ruthlessly refinanced their Denver home for the 3rd time just to fund a custom, imported Italian kitchen renovation for Chloe's Connecticut mansion. My parents were blindly marching straight into absolute financial ruin, cannibalizing their own secure retirement just to ensure their golden child never had to experience a single moment of reality. Then, in early November, the fateful Thanksgiving invitation arrived. It wasn't a warm, familial phone call. It was a sterile, heavily formatted email from Chloe that read more like a corporate summons or a highly restrictive legal subpoena. Preston and I are hosting the annual Thanksgiving gathering this year, the email aggressively dictated. Mom and Dad will be flying in. It would be socially appropriate to have the entire family present. Arrive on Wednesday afternoon. The guest room on the 3rd floor has been allocated to you. Please ensure you dress appropriately and groom yourself. Preston's parents, Richard and Eleanor, will be attending, and we expect a certain standard of presentation. Do not embarrass us. I sat on the balcony of my penthouse apartment, watching the Arizona sunset paint the desert sky, and read the email 4 times. My initial visceral instinct was to immediately delete it, block her email address, and book a first-class flight to the Maldives for the holiday. I had spent years successfully avoiding their toxic orbit. But a dark, irresistible curiosity began to gnaw at me. I wanted to see it. I wanted to look into their eyes and see the fragile, collapsing house of cards they had built with all that unconditional support I had never, ever received. I wanted to sit in the center of their fake, pretentious kingdom, knowing I could buy and sell all of them 100 times over without breaking a sweat. "I'll be there," I typed back simply, hitting send before I could talk myself out of it. Chloe replied within 3 minutes. "Excellent. Remember the dress code. Don't wear your usual tech support hoodies." Even through a digital screen, the sheer, unadulterated disrespect radiated like toxic waste. It merely reinforced my precise place in their rigid, medieval hierarchy. I was the peasant being graciously allowed into the castle courtyard for a single meal. I booked a first-class ticket to Connecticut because I could, but I made a conscious, highly calculated decision. I was going to play my assigned role to absolute perfection. I packed plain, unbranded jeans, a slightly faded button-down shirt, and scuffed boots. I wasn't going to show up wearing a Rolex or a custom-tailored Italian suit. I was going to walk into their meticulously staged, pretentious play looking exactly like the pathetic, struggling background character they so desperately needed me to be. I had absolutely no idea that by accepting this condescending invitation, I was walking directly into a trap that would ultimately detonate our entire family dynamic into a million unrecognizable pieces. Connecticut in late November looked exactly like a pretentious, heavily photoshopped postcard for extreme generational wealth. The autumn leaves were a perfect, vibrant orange, and the massive, sprawling estates sat far back from the winding, private roads. Chloe's house was located in Greenwich, of course. It was an exclusive, notoriously snobbish zip code where the property taxes alone cost more than the average American's annual salary. My Uber pulled up to a massive, imposing modern colonial with a pristine circular driveway, towering stone columns, and aggressive, professional landscaping that looked like it was maintained by a golf course groundskeeper. Chloe answered the heavy oak front door wearing a ridiculously expensive designer cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored trousers. Her smile was tight, incredibly brittle, and strictly reserved for the wealthy neighbors. She offered me a quick, rigid side hug that was entirely performance art. "You actually made it," she said, her eyes immediately darting up and down, critically judging my plain, faded jacket. She sighed heavily, deeply disappointed but entirely unsurprised. "Everyone else is already in the great room mingling. Oh, by the way, slight change of plans regarding the sleeping arrangements." I stopped taking off my boots. The email explicitly said the third-floor guest room was mine. Chloe waved her hand dismissively, her diamond rings flashing under the massive chandelier. "Yes, well, reality intervened. That room is currently being used as Preston's overflow office. He has incredibly important merger documents everywhere. We booked you a room at the local Holiday in downtown. It's honestly much better for you. You'll have your own space, and you won't feel so intimidated being around Preston's family." My mother suddenly appeared in the grand foyer, holding a crystal wine glass. "Oh, there's my Arizona boy," she chirped, offering a distracted peck on my cheek. "Don't be upset about the hotel, honey. We had to pivot. We're currently helping Chloe fund the installation of her new imported Italian marble countertops for the secondary kitchen. The materials alone were $35,000, and the house is in chaos. The hotel is just more practical for someone of your lifestyle." So, they had just drained another massive chunk of their dwindling retirement fund to buy Chloe unnecessarily expensive rocks. And as a direct result, I was being officially kicked out of the family home and banished to a budget motel. The utter disrespect was so blatant it was almost comical. "The Holiday Inn is fine," I said smoothly, keeping my face a completely unreadable mask of stone. "I prefer the quiet anyway." Over the next 2 hours, the grand house slowly filled with Greenwich's absolute finest society members. They were all doing their highly polished, incredibly fake human routines, discussing stock portfolios, exclusive country club memberships, and private schools. I stood near the kitchen island, quietly nursing a glass of sparkling water, simply observing the circus. That's when the deeply unsettling interrogation began. It started with my mom. She cornered me near the appetizers, her eyes darting around nervously. "Honey, I was just trying to remember for a security question on my new iPad. What was the exact name of that horrible street we lived on when you were born?" "The one in Denver." "Covington?" I replied slowly, my internal alarms starting to blare. Right. She laughed nervously. "And what was the name of that ugly dog you had when you were 10? The one that ran away." "Buster. Why are you asking this?" "Just reminiscing," she said quickly, practically sprinting away. 20 minutes later, Chloe slid up next to me, her voice lowered conspiratorially. "Hey, completely random question, but didn't you have a starter savings account at some obscure local credit union back in high school? What was the name of that place?" "I'm researching banks for the twins' college funds." "First Mountain Credit," I said, staring directly into her eyes. It was a massive, glaring red flag. Nobody casually asks for your mother's maiden name, your childhood street, and your first pet's name just for casual conversation. They were fishing for my security questions. But I played dumb, feeding them the accurate answers just to see exactly how far they were willing to take this horrific betrayal. Before I could press her, Chloe aggressively changed the subject. Listen, she hissed, her pleasant mask dropping completely. Preston's senior managing partner just walked in. This dinner is essentially an informal evaluation for Preston's promotion to executive partner. I need you to be highly strategic tonight. When people ask what you do not lead with that pathetic little software hobby of yours. Tell them you're exploring consulting opportunities in the tech sector. It sounds significantly less embarrassing. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her sheer audacity. You want me to actively lie about my career so your husband looks better by comparison? I'm asking you to not be a total liability for one single night. She snapped, her manicured nails digging painfully into my forearm. Is that really too much to ask? Actually, you know what? Make yourself useful for once. The Wi-Fi router in the den is acting up. Since you work with computers, go fix it. Now. She said it loudly, intentionally loudly. The entire room of wealthy guests went completely, awkwardly silent. Several of Preston's elite colleagues chuckled under their breath. The tech support guy is here. One of them murmured, swirling his scotch. My dad laughed, a booming, arrogant sound. Come on, son. It's just a basic router. Takes a tech guy like you 5 minutes. Don't be difficult in front of the guests. They had publicly, maliciously assigned me the role of the hired help, completely stripping away my dignity in a room full of strangers, expecting me to smile and bow. I am not your personal IT support, I said flatly, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor blade. Call Comcast. Chloe's jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. Wow. Okay. So you refuse to dress appropriately, you refuse to position yourself well, and you won't even help your own family with a basic task. What exactly is your contribution to this family, besides taking up space? I looked around the room. Everyone was watching the horrific spectacle. I just smiled, a cold, terrifying smile, and walked toward the dining room. I'm just here for the turkey, Chloe. By 4 p.m., the grand, highly choreographed Thanksgiving feast commenced. We processed into the massive, echoing formal dining room in strict order of perceived societal importance. Chloe and Preston commanded the heads of the long, mahogany table like royalty holding court. My parents were proudly seated in the esteemed positions of highest honor directly next to them. I was deliberately wedged at the very far, freezing end of the table, sandwiched between Preston's heavily perfumed, hard-of-hearing elderly aunt and an arrogant junior architect from Chloe's failing firm who spent the entire meal aggressively chewing with his mouth open. The table itself looked like a lavish spread straight out of Architectural Digest. There were hand-calligraphed name cards, 3 distinct types of crystal glasses per setting, and towering, imported floral centerpieces that obstructed everyone's view. Preston stood up, tapping his crystal wine glass with a silver fork, radiating toxic, unearned confidence. He gave a long, nauseatingly boastful toast about his grueling year in private equity and how blessed they were to own multiple properties. Then began the agonizing, mandatory family tradition, going around the table and sharing what everyone was most thankful for. Chloe, naturally, went first. She stood up, smoothing her designer dress. I am profoundly thankful for my absolutely thriving architectural firm, my recent appointment to the elite regional planning board, my beautiful, gifted children, and of course, our stunning new Martha's Vineyard estate where we will undoubtedly create generations of magical family memories. My parents beamed at her like she had personally cured a global pandemic. My mom literally wiped a theatrical tear from her eye. I am just so incredibly grateful for Chloe, her stunning family, and the amazing success she brings to our name, my mom gushed. Oh, and of course, both my children. The afterthought addition was so jarringly clumsy it was almost physical. The ritual slowly, painfully made its way around the massive table. Generic, wealthy gratitudes about stock portfolios and ski trips. Finally, all eyes fell on me at the far end of the table. I set down my fork, taking a slow sip of water. The room was dead silent. I'm profoundly grateful for learning exactly how to build something massive from absolutely nothing, I said, my voice calm and perfectly steady. I'm thankful for the harsh lessons that taught me external validation is a completely optional illusion, and I am grateful for the ultimate freedom to define absolute success on my own terms, without needing anyone's permission or money. Chloe's fake smile tightened so violently it looked painful. How very philosophical and quaint, she sneered, dripping with condescension. She aggressively signaled the hired caterers, and the extravagant food started flowing. For the next hour, the conversation settled into safe, deeply boring territory. Country club gossip, the soaring value of real estate, and complaints about finding good domestic help. I mostly observed in silence, perfectly content to be ignored. But Chloe simply couldn't let it go. She needed a victim to sacrifice to elevate her status. She pivoted sharply toward me, her eyes gleaming with sudden, malicious intent. Actually, since we are all gathered here, she announced loudly, ensuring every single person at the table stopped chewing. She locked her predatory gaze on me. Preston and I are planning a massive, custom expansion of the Martha's Vineyard house. We are asking the core family to financially contribute as a legacy investment. Mom and Dad have generously pledged to pull $80,000 from their retirement. We thought it would be highly appropriate if you pledged $70,000. The entire dining room went utterly, completely silent. The audacity was so staggering it sucked the oxygen out of the room. No, I said instantly. Just one word. Flat and final. Her smile completely vanished, replaced by genuine fury. Excuse me? It is a family investment. Everyone contributes. You live in a cheap condo in Arizona. You have zero expenses. $70,000 is absolutely nothing for someone claiming to work in the tech industry. The answer is still no, Chloe. I'm not funding your vacation home. Her voice turned incredibly sharp, echoing off the mahogany walls. Unless, of course, you are drastically exaggerating your financial situation. The arrogant way you vaguely talk about this little company of yours, I am starting to firmly believe it's not successful at all. In fact, I think you're working some basic, entry-level IT support job, completely failing, and desperately calling it entrepreneurship to save face. The temperature in the room plummeted to absolute zero. My mother gasped, but didn't defend me. Stop being so dramatic and secretive. Mom scolded me, exasperated. If you are drowning in debt and struggling, just admit it. We're family. We can try to help you figure out a payment plan. Yeah. Dad aggressively nodded, pointing his fork at me. Stop with the arrogant tech genius act. Just be honest about your failures. This secretive act is embarrassing us in front of Preston's family. The entire room was staring at me, all of them eagerly backing her vicious play. They wanted to rip me down to the studs. Then, a deep, commanding voice cut through the toxic chaos from the opposite end of the table. What exact company did you say you founded, son? It was Richard, Preston's father. He was a tall, imposing man with incredibly sharp, predatory eyes. He was a self-made billionaire, the kind of ruthless, brilliant man who had actually built a massive logistics empire with his bare hands before inheriting the rest of the world. I looked him dead in the eye. TrackCore. The absolute transformation in Richard's demeanor was instantaneous and terrifying. He went entirely, unnervingly still. He slowly placed his crystal wine glass down on the mahogany table, completely ignoring the tension radiating from Chloe and his own son. TrackCore, Richard repeated, his voice dropping an octave, testing the word like a heavy coin. You operate in the commercial supply chain security sector. Correct. Yes, sir. Highly specialized logistics tracking and forensic data recovery. I replied, sitting up slightly straighter. Richard narrowed his sharp eyes, studying me with the intense scrutiny of a predator evaluating a rival. Let me test you. Explain the shadow tracking protocol, the specific proprietary architecture that operates invisibly during the sensor refresh gaps. Explain it to me right now. It wasn't a polite conversation starter. It was a highly technical, aggressive test designed to expose a liar instantly. Chloe rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly. Richard, please, don't indulge his ridiculous fantasies. He doesn't know what... Quiet, Chloe? Richard snapped, his tone so incredibly harsh and commanding that she physically flinched backward into her chair. He didn't break eye contact with me. Explain it, son. I didn't hesitate. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. Our competitors leave a massive 50-second vulnerability window during mandatory over-the-air firmware updates. Thieves know this. So we engineered a completely parallel dormant tracking layer built on a secondary mesh network. The second the primary system goes down for the update, the shadow layer instantly activates, running entirely on internal battery reserves. Creates an invisible, unhackable data trail. The thieves utilizing the update gap have absolutely no idea they are still being actively logged at a higher frequency. When the primary system reboots, the shadow data secretly merges, providing a perfect, seamless forensic map of the stolen asset. Richard stared at me in profound, heavy silence for 10 agonizing seconds. The entire dining room was holding its collective breath. You could hear a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. Slowly, deliberately, Richard picked up his napkin and wiped his mouth. That exact, specific protocol, Richard said, his voice vibrating with absolute certainty, personally saved my international logistics firm from a highly coordinated, inside job fraud scheme that would have cost us over $3 million in heavy equipment. I personally sat in on the executive vendor briefing when my security team aggressively evaluated your system 3 years ago. He paused, letting the immense weight of his words crash into the room. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Wait, Richard said, his brow furrowing as he connected the massive dots. Industriate Tech acquired that entire system. I read the trade filings. They bought TrackCore a couple of years ago. Another agonizing, brutal pause. They acquired it for $26.5 million. He slowly turned his head to look directly at a pale, trembling Chloe. Your brother built that, Richard said, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. His incredible architectural brilliance is the sole reason my firm's global supply chain is secure tonight. And you, sitting in a house your parents are taking out loans to pay for, just had the sheer, unmitigated audacity to publicly accuse him of lying and working a pathetic entry-level job. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a physical, crushing weight. It was the sound of an entire, fake reality violently collapsing in on itself. That is exactly what we were waiting for. You can't write a better plot twist. It's poetic justice that the exact billionaire family Chloe was desperately trying to impress is the one that completely validates OP's success. The absolute irony of Chloe begging for 70 grand while calling OP a failure, only to be humiliated by her own father-in-law, is pure gold. Chloe's perfectly contoured face went entirely, sickly white, drained of all blood. Her mouth opened and closed like a dying fish, but no sound came out. 26? My mother stammered, dropping her expensive silver fork. Clattered loudly against her china plate. What? $1 million? 18 million liquid after taxes, actually, I said quietly, taking another calm sip of water. Chloe violently grabbed the edge of the heavy table, her knuckles turning stark white. That is absolutely not possible. That's a lie. You're lying to Richard. We would have. My dad's voice cracked pitifully, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. Why on earth would you keep this massive secret from us? We are your family. I stood up slowly, calmly throwing my expensive linen napkin onto my half-eaten plate. I looked down at the people who had made my entire life a living hell. Because you aggressively, rigidly decided exactly who I was 30 years ago, I said, my voice echoing in the massive room. You decided I was the worthless loser. Nothing I built, no amount of money or success, would ever change the fictional story you desperately needed to tell yourselves to justify treating me like garbage. Chloe was breathing hard, practically hyperventilating, her eyes wild with a mixture of shock and sudden, terrifying greed. This is completely insane. You were sitting there saying you had tens of millions of dollars, while Mom and Dad were actively bankrupting themselves helping us with. She abruptly stopped herself, realizing what she was about to admit in front of her wealthy in-laws. With your massive down payment, I finished for her, my voice turning to pure ice. With your incredibly unnecessary Italian marble renovations? With Preston's firm capital? While you had the city code enforcement throw me out of my apartment so I had to sleep in my freezing car for a month. Yes, Chloe, I had the money, and I watched you bleed them dry. And you said absolutely nothing? Dad yelled, standing up, his fists clenched. Why the hell would I? I shot back, the raw anger finally bleeding into my voice. You made it abundantly clear where I ranked in this family. I finally accepted it. I'm just respecting your hierarchy. I pushed my heavy chair back. The turkey is dry, Chloe. I'm leaving. Wait! Mom screamed, practically lunging across the table, knocking over a crystal wine glass. Please, honey, sit down. We can talk about this. Do not ever contact me again, I said, looking at all of them one last time. I turned my back and walked out of the mansion, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind me with a deeply satisfying finality. The Uber driver waiting outside didn't ask a single question as we drove away into the freezing Connecticut night. I checked into a completely different, highly secure luxury hotel on the opposite side of town under a corporate alias. I ordered a massive, overpriced room service steak, took a long, incredibly hot shower, turned off my phone, and slept better than I had in 29 years. When I finally woke up the next morning and booted up my phone, it nearly froze from the sheer volume of notifications. I had 37 missed calls and over 80 frantic text messages. I opened the toxic family group chat. It was an absolute, terrifying psychological meltdown. Chloe had spent the entire night frantically posting unhinged screenshots. She had scoured my heavily sanitized LinkedIn, found random tech articles about startup failures, and posted blurry photos of random people she claimed were me. Chloe, 12:47 a.m. There is absolutely no listing of him as Track Course founder in any public state records. I checked. This might be a massive, fabricated lie to humiliate Preston in front of his father. Mom, 1:45 a.m. Please, honey, just tell us the truth. We won't be angry if you embellish the numbers to impress Richard. Just call us back so we can fix this. Chloe, 3:33 a.m. I honestly think he might be having a severe, psychotic mental breakdown. The delusions of grandeur, the extreme isolation, the hostility. We might need to stage a medical intervention and get him committed. I didn't argue. I didn't type a single word in response. I calmly opened my secure photo vault, retrieved the highly confidential, unredacted Industriate Tech Acquisition press release, and the signed banking wire transfer receipt. It had my full legal name, the exact corporate terms, and the staggering $26.5 million payout printed in bold, undeniable black and white. I posted the single photo directly to the group chat. No caption, no explanation. Then, I permanently muted the chat and went back to drinking my coffee. At exactly 7:12 a.m., the heavy phone on my hotel nightstand rang. It was the front desk manager. His voice was careful, tight with professional anxiety. Sir, I apologize for the early intrusion. There is a deeply distressed woman currently causing a scene in our lobby, claiming to be your sister, Chloe. She is stating there is an extreme medical family emergency, that you are in a highly dangerous mental state, and she is aggressively demanding a master key to your room because you aren't responding to her calls. My blood ran completely cold. Chloe was literally auditioning for her own true crime documentary. She also explicitly told our security staff that you have been heavily lying about your finances, and she is terrified you might do something legally stupid with stolen funds. The manager added, "Do not, under any circumstances, give anyone access to my room or my floor." I instructed the manager, my voice deadly calm. I want you to officially flag my reservation as no visitors, no exceptions. Note her exact name. If she attempts to bypass the elevators, call the police immediately for trespassing. I hung up, my adrenaline spiking. Then, my personal cell phone vibrated violently on the desk. It wasn't a text from my family. It was a rapid-fire series of severe, critical security alerts from my primary wealth management bank and my offshore brokerage accounts. Alert. Multiple unauthorized login attempts detected. Alert. Password reset requested via security questions. I opened the banking app, my heart hammering against my ribs. Someone was aggressively trying to hack into my financial accounts. I looked at the failed login logs. They were attempting to bypass the password by answering the account recovery questions. What was the name of your first pet? What was the name of your childhood street? What was the name of your first bank? The sickening realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The seemingly innocent, reminiscing interrogation from my mother and Chloe at the party yesterday wasn't idle conversation. They were maliciously fishing for my highly secure personal data. The absolute second they realized I actually had $18 million, their immediate, terrifyingly greedy instinct wasn't to apologize. It was to literally attempt to steal my identity and drain my accounts while simultaneously trying to have me committed to a psych ward so they could assume legal conservatorship. Wait, did I read that right? They went from just being entitled snobs to literally committing federal wire fraud and identity theft. Trying to lock your son in a psych ward to steal his money? The game was officially over. It was time to drop the nuclear bomb. I didn't call them to scream or argue. I immediately called my ruthless corporate attorney back in Arizona. I authorized him to draft a devastating 10-page cease and desist order, backed by a terrifying litigation hold. I have timestamped security alerts showing coordinated, unauthorized attempts to access my federal banking accounts using highly sensitive personal information they actively fished from me 24 hours ago. I told my lawyer, pacing the hotel room, this isn't family drama anymore. This is a Class C felony. This is federal wire fraud and attempted identity theft. I want the letter sent by heavily armed courier to all three of them by noon. Within 4 hours, the heavy legal documents were served directly to the Greenwich Mansion. The language was merciless. It demanded absolute, permanent silence. It legally mandated the preservation of all digital communications for a pending FBI cybercrimes referral. But I didn't stop there. I hired a vicious forensic accountant to run a completely legal, deep-dive background audit on my parents' public financial records. The resulting dossier was staggering. Over the last 15 years, my parents had irresponsibly funneled exactly $915,000 to Chloe. This included her $450,000 elite education, her lavish wedding, massive down payments on multiple properties, endless luxury renovations, and direct cash infusions to keep her failing architectural firm afloat. In stark contrast, my total lifetime financial support amounted to the $7,500 college contribution. Because of their blind, toxic obsession with funding Chloe's fake billionaire lifestyle, my parents were currently $250,000 entirely upside down on their heavily mortgaged home. Their retirement accounts were completely depleted. They were essentially living month to month on Social Security and mounting credit card debt. I attached the brutal forensic report to my final email to them. You had exactly 30 years to build a relationship with me, I wrote in the concluding paragraph. You actively chose not to. You chose to fund a toxic illusion. I am respecting your lifelong choice by removing myself permanently from your reality. If any of you ever attempt to contact me, or attempt to access my accounts again, I will personally hand this massive file of wire fraud evidence to the federal authorities and watch you go to prison. Enjoy your marble countertops. The consequences of their own actions began landing with catastrophic force within 3 weeks. Preston's elite private equity firm was finalizing his highly anticipated partnership review. During the mandatory high-level executive background check, the routine sweep flagged extreme family litigation risks. It pulled up the formal police welfare check, the documented hotel incident, and my attorney's formal cease and desist letter detailing severe federal fraud allegations against his wife. Preston was immediately summoned by the managing partners and forced to agonizingly explain why his wife had filed a completely false, malicious police report about her own brother's mental health while simultaneously attempting a federal cyber theft of his bank accounts. He was permanently withdrawn from partnership consideration and quietly demoted. My parents, desperate to keep the illusion alive, attempted to aggressively refinance their house for a fourth time to cover Chloe's disastrous Martha's Vineyard expansion. The bank deeply reviewed their terrifying financial history, saw the catastrophic pattern of reckless cash-out refinances funneled to one child, and flatly denied the loan. Unable to afford the massive property taxes or the private school tuition, they were forced to put their beloved house on the market at a massive loss to avoid imminent bank foreclosure. As for Chloe, the absolute worst punishment imaginable happened. Her carefully crafted reputation shattered into a million pieces. Word spread incredibly fast in the tight-knit, gossipy high society architectural circles. Two major commercial firms completely withdrew lucrative collaboration offers after their legal teams ran standard due diligence and found the active family legal disputes involving fraud. The cracks in her golden armor became massive craters she could never repair. She was exposed as a fraud, a thief, and a failure. I didn't have to engineer a single piece of their destruction. I didn't have to seek revenge. I just stayed perfectly quiet, legally documented every single malicious thing they did, and let their own suffocating panic, unearned arrogance, and blind greed light every single fuse. After that final email, there was only absolute beautiful silence. No more fake calls, no more toxic texts, no more pathetic, groveling apologies. I had built something massive, real, and undeniable, while they had spent their entire lives desperately building a fragile story. And my incredible story didn't need any of them in it anymore. I walked out of the hotel, stepped into the bright, freezing sunlight, and never looked back. Let's just unpack this for a second. In my honest opinion, OP did absolutely nothing wrong, and the way he handled the ending was a masterclass in setting boundaries. A lot of people might say, "Oh, but he should have helped his parents from losing their house." No, absolutely not. When people show you exactly who they are for 30 years, you believe them. Sending that final legal dossier and walking away cleanly without seeking illegal revenge was the perfect, healthy closure. Let's see what the community had to say about this, because the comments on this thread were wild. User TechBro99 says, "Not the asshole. Your family treated you like a peasant in your own home. The fact that you didn't press charges for the attempted bank hack makes you a saint. Enjoy your millions." I completely agree with TechBro99. OP was way too generous by just sending a cease and desist. If it were me, the police would have been waiting at Chloe's mansion before the turkey was even cold. But we have a different perspective here. User Devil's Advocate _88 says, "Yes, your family is toxic, but you going to that Thanksgiving dinner just to bait them and watch their world burn was incredibly petty. You stooped to their level just to gloat." I have to respectfully disagree with this take. I don't think OP stooped to their level at all. He didn't even plan to brag. Preston's dad was the one who exposed the secret. OP just showed up in plain clothes. Sometimes sitting back and letting karma do its job isn't petty. It's just human nature. What an insane family dynamic. But I want to pass the question over to you guys. Do you think OP went too far by letting his parents lose their house? Or did they get exactly what they deserved for blindly funding Chloe's fake lifestyle? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this wild ride, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more crazy Reddit stories, and I will see you guys in the next video.